Ever wondered how the CIA got involved in the Vietnam War? Let's turn back the hands of time to the early 1950s when the world was still reeling from World War II and a new conflict was brewing in Southeast Asia. In the early stages of what would later become the Vietnam War, the CIA was involved in a series of covert operations. The goal, at its core, was simple: support anti-communist forces in Vietnam. The execution, however, was anything but. The CIA, a relatively young organization at the time, was tasked with a mission that would shape its identity for decades to come. The CIA's involvement in Vietnam began with a focus on gathering intelligence and supporting the fledgling South Vietnamese government. They provided training, funding, and guidance to anti-communist forces in the region. On the surface, it seemed like a straightforward mission, but underneath, it was a complex web of politics, power, and secrets. One of the key events that shaped the CIA's role in Vietnam was the 1954 Geneva Conference. This conference was meant to resolve several problems in Asia, including the French Indochina War. The CIA was deeply involved in the negotiations, advocating for a partition of Vietnam along the 17th parallel. This decision, intended to be a temporary solution, ultimately set the stage for a protracted and bloody conflict. Behind the scenes, the CIA was also busy orchestrating covert operations to undermine the communist forces in the north. These operations ranged from propaganda campaigns to covert funding of anti-communist groups. It was a shadowy war, fought not with guns and bombs but with information and influence. So, as the 50s rolled into the 60s, the situation in Vietnam became increasingly complicated. The CIA found itself in a position of significant influence, shaping the course of events in a country thousands of miles away from American soil. And with every passing year, the stakes got higher, the operations more intricate, and the secrets deeper. So, the stage was set for a covert war with the CIA at the heart of it. As the Vietnam War escalated, so too did the CIA's covert operations. From the late 1950s to the early 70s, the Central Intelligence Agency, or the CIA, became an increasingly significant player in the unfolding of the Vietnam War. Their role? Far from the public eye, often hidden in the shadows of secrecy and deniability. One of the most notorious operations during this period was Operation Phoenix. Initiated in 1967, this program aimed to disrupt the Viet Cong infrastructure through infiltration, capture, interrogation, and, in some instances, neutralization. It was a war not fought on the battlefields but in the villages and hamlets of South Vietnam, a war against an invisible enemy within the civilian population. The CIA's activities weren't limited to Operation Phoenix, though. As the war escalated, the agency found itself involved in a multitude of covert operations, each one more complex and shrouded in secrecy than the last. In 1968, the Tet Offensive took the world by surprise. The North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces launched a series of surprise attacks, targeting major cities and military bases throughout South Vietnam. While the US military was caught off guard, the CIA had been warning of such an offensive for months. However, their reports were largely ignored, buried under the optimistic narrative that was being pushed at the time. The CIA's role in the Tet Offensive remains a topic of debate among historians. Some argue that the intelligence failure to convince military leaders of the impending attack resulted in unnecessary loss and chaos. Others suggest that the CIA's accurate prediction of the offensive, albeit ignored, marked a turning point in the war, causing a shift in public opinion and policy decisions. While the soldiers fought openly, the CIA waged a hidden war. A war that was as much about information and perception as it was about bullets and bombs. A war that to this day remains shrouded in secrecy, its true impact still unfolding in the pages of history. In war, information is power, and the CIA was in the business of information. The Vietnam War, like any other, had its share of secrets and subterfuges, but the role of the Central Intelligence Agency in this conflict was more than just a footnote in history. In this theater of war, the CIA was not just a silent observer. They were active players, gathering intelligence, deciphering codes, and even running covert operations. They were the eyes and ears of the United States in Vietnam, providing critical insights that often shaped the course of the war. One of the most controversial aspects of the CIA's involvement in Vietnam was the Phoenix program. This was a covert operation designed to neutralize the Viet Cong infrastructure through capture, interrogation, and sometimes targeted killings. It was a war within a war, fought not on the front lines but in the shadows, where information was a weapon as deadly as any bullet. The Phoenix program was, by its very nature, shrouded in secrecy. The CIA was in the business of information, but it was also in the business of disinformation. The true extent of the program and its impact on the war remains a subject of debate to this day. Yet, what is undeniable is the key role that the CIA played in the intelligence war. Their work in Vietnam set a precedent for the agency's future involvement in conflicts around the world. It was a game changer, a new way of waging war that relied not just on brute force, but on the power of information. The Vietnam War was a crucible, a testing ground for new tactics and strategies. And in this crucible, the CIA was not just a participant, but a pioneer, pushing the boundaries of what was possible in the realm of intelligence gathering and warfare. In the shadows, the CIA was fighting a war of information. A war that would redefine the agency and its role in conflicts to come, a war that continues to cast a long shadow over the history of the Central Intelligence Agency. As the Vietnam War came to an end, questions about the CIA's involvement started to emerge. The dust of the battlefield had barely settled when the whispers began. A clandestine force operating in the shadows had played a significant role in the war. That force was none other than the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA. The public, politicians, and even military personnel started to question the covert operations of the CIA in the Vietnam War. What exactly had happened in the jungles of Vietnam under the CIA's watch? How deep did the rabbit hole go? The Church Committee, a U.S. Senate Select Committee, was formed in 1975 to investigate alleged abuses of power by the CIA and other intelligence agencies. It was like lifting a rock only to find a nest of unsettling truths. The CIA had not only been gathering intelligence, but it also orchestrated a myriad of covert operations, including psychological warfare, paramilitary actions, and even assassination plots. This revelation was like a punch to the gut of the American public. The war they thought they knew had been, in many ways, a facade. The real war had been one of secrets, lies, and covert operations. It was a war where the line between friend and foe was blurry at best. The Church Committee's investigations brought the CIA's activities into the light, but it also raised more questions than it answered. How much of the war's outcome was shaped by the CIA's actions? What were the long-term consequences of their covert operations? And perhaps most importantly, was the CIA's role in the war justified? The Vietnam War may have ended, but its shadow lingered on, casting doubts and questions about the role played by the CIA. The battlefield had moved from the jungles of Vietnam to the court of public opinion, with the CIA's reputation and legacy on trial. The war was over, but the CIA's role in it was just beginning to be understood. The Vietnam War left a lasting legacy, not least for the CIA. In the aftermath of the conflict, the agency found itself at the center of intense scrutiny and criticism. Its role, once shrouded in mystery, now exposed to the harsh light of public opinion, was deeply controversial. The CIA's involvement in Vietnam led to significant changes in its operational practices. It was a wake-up call, a catalyst for reform. The agency was forced to rethink its strategies, its methods, its very ethos. It had to confront the reality that its actions had consequences, and that these consequences could be devastating. The war underscored the importance of accurate intelligence and the dangers of political interference. But perhaps the most profound impact of the Vietnam War on the CIA was the damage it inflicted on the agency's public image. The war shattered the illusion of the CIA as an infallible guardian of American interests. It revealed a different picture, one of an organization capable of mistakes, of overreach, of failure. The public's trust in the agency was severely shaken. This loss of faith was not easily repaired and continues to influence perceptions of the CIA to this day. Yet in the face of these challenges, the CIA demonstrated a remarkable capacity for adaptation and resilience. It learned from its mistakes, it evolved. It developed new approaches to intelligence gathering and analysis, and it worked to rebuild its relationship with the public. It emerged from the Vietnam War a different organization, more transparent, more accountable, more effective. The Vietnam War was a turning point for the CIA, a moment that forever changed the agency and its operations. It was a period of trial and error, of hard-learned lessons, but it was also a period of growth and transformation. And so, the legacy of the CIA in Vietnam is a complex one, a tale of missteps and misunderstandings, but also of resilience and reform. It is a story that continues to shape the CIA and the world in profound ways.